Okay, good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Casey Murphy, and I'm ACT's Director of Programs and Events. I want to thank you for joining us today for ACT's second September webinar entitled The Distributed Office Model, a Commute-Based Approach to a Safe Return to Work. This webinar this afternoon is sponsored by our good friends at Commute-Based. Before we hear from our presenters this afternoon, I wanted to quickly take care of a few housekeeping items. First, all attendees are on mute during this webinar. If you have a question or have a problem hearing us, please type it in the chat box located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to answer your questions as the webinar gets going. Second, we'll be hosting a Q&A at the end of the webinar, but please feel free to type in your questions as we go in the Q&A box located at the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Please note that when asking a question, please also identify who the question is for when typing it in. Finally, this session is being recorded. We'll have the recording up on the ACT website within 24 hours after the presentation ends. Now I'd like to go ahead and introduce David Strauss, ACT's Executive Director, to give an update on what ACT has going on. David?
Thank you, Casey. Good afternoon, everybody. It's the premier association for TDM professionals. ACT's goal is to build a strong community of individuals and organizations working to advance and implement TDM at their work sites and within their communities. ACT is your organization for the latest information and best practices in TDM. We've got a great audience today, another stellar registration with over 200 folks registering to attend. I want to thank all of you that have participated in ACT's events over the recent months. If you're not yet a member, I invite you to join your colleagues and become a part of our community. I guarantee you that ACT membership will be a valued investment in your professional growth and development. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to update everyone on some news from ACT. In the coming days, we will be announcing the opening of registration and the programming for ACT's virtual TDM forum, replacing our in-person event that was to be held in Atlanta in November. The event will feature unique opportunities for attendees to network and discuss TDM issues in small groups while learning about broader TDM challenges and opportunities. The event will also feature the release of ACT's 40 Under 40 honorees. I know that many have already logged in to Connect, our new online member community, where ACT brings the TDM professionals together. There's an exciting new benefit for ACT members to post questions, share resources, and network with their colleagues. If you have not yet logged on, or if you've logged on but not yet activated your account, I encourage you to do so today by visiting connect.actweb.org. This week, we'll be opening communities for ACT's chapters and councils. You can also access Connect directly from the ACT homepage. While many chapters and councils are currently conducting elections for their leadership, next week, ACT will open nominations seeking interest from members to serve on ACT's 6 national board committees, including public policy, professional development, governance, and others. These are great opportunities to take on direct leadership roles, helping advance the organization at the national level. So it's now my pleasure to introduce today's webinar, the Distributed Office Model. As we're already seeing, COVID-19 will have a lasting impact on the workplace and commuting. As companies rethink workplace strategies and what the office looks like moving forward, flexibility for employees is the common thread. A safe and effective future leverages a combination of remote work and distributed hub and spoke model. This webinar, sponsored by Commute-Based, will explore how distributed offices can lead to a safer workplace and dive deeper into how the 15-minute commute strategy can help you create the best distribution. It's now my pleasure to introduce our sponsor today, Andy Keaton from Commute-Based, who is the Sustainability and Product Strategist at Commute-Based. With an engineering degree from UC Berkeley and a master's degree in sustainable transportation from CU Boulder, he brings a data-driven approach to solving the biggest commuting problems. He leads the behavioral data science team at Commute-Based and is the resident expert on commuter behavior, transportation planning, and commute program analysis. Before joining Commutify, Andy worked at the Rocky Mountain Institute and authored a white paper on influencing commuter behavior with commuter scoring. In his spare time, you'll find him traveling full-time as a digital nomad once the pandemic passes, or organizing for Democrats running for office. Alex, the floor is yours.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Casey.
Sorry,
and
Alex, Andy.
No worries. Thanks, David and Casey, and everyone at ACT for having us. And thanks in advance to the rest of the panelists who I'll introduce shortly here to you all. And final big thanks to everyone here who is attending. So today we're talking about the distributed office model. Some people might call it the hub and spoke model, micro-distributed offices. Really the idea here is moving the office location closer to the employees versus having one centralized office where folks have to commute long distances to get into the office. So what we're really aiming for here is to maximize the number of people within what we call a 15-minute commute. Ideally, that's 15 minutes walking or biking, but even really 15 minutes via driving can have a big impact on the environment, cost savings as well, and of course, big time savings. So before we jump in, you'll see at the bottom of the screen here a link. This is a link to a free analysis that we offer at Commutify to run a distributed office model analysis for you. So it'll be up at the end as well. We can talk more about that, but we think at Commutify that this is a really good opportunity moving forward for companies coming out of COVID. So before I launch in to a little bit more on that, I think it's helpful to just kind of get an idea of what we do at Commutify to give a sense for why we are focusing on this distributed office model. So what we do is take these 5 elements of commuting, data management, data analysis, program development, commuter benefits, and commute management, and we put it into one cyclical process, starting with our commuter score. This is a way that we normalize all data, get a good idea of how commutes are. And this is where we come from when we talk about the distributed offices, and you'll see here in a second, is we were realizing that commuter scores were a bit low all around the country, and that if a closer office was open, those commuter scores could jump in just huge numbers, especially even compared to other TDM solutions. So with that said, why would an office or why would an organization consider opening up a distributed workforce? So there's really 4 components here coming from really where the context we're in now with COVID. The first is that, as you all know, there's this minimum 6 feet of distance that you need to keep safe. And in most offices, that space is not available. So in your current headquarters, you may not be able to handle the full 100 or 1,000 people that would have to come back to that office. So with that consideration, you may be thinking about having people work from home for a lot longer, but we think this distributed workforce could be a solution to that. Additionally, we've seen that driving rates are expected to increase. With that comes parking demand. As people come back to the office post-COVID, while public transit and shuttles are actually really safe, and we've learned about that in other ACT webinars in the recent past here, people just don't necessarily feel that way, so we could see driving increase by as much as 35%. That means that if you don't have that parking demand ready, you're going to have a problem with that. And pre-COVID, we've seen that almost a quarter of workers have left their job because of a bad commute. And with each employee turnover that you have, that's going to cost you really about 33% of your employee salary. So these are big potential cost problems as well for the company. And finally, with COVID and everyone having been home for a while and having that 0-minute commute, a recent study has shown that 70% of employees would prefer to be within 15 minutes, ideally walking or biking, of their office. They're not quite excited to get back to that 60-minute commute they had pre-COVID. So with all that being said, what could a distributed office do for you? And so here's an example of looking at a headquarters in the San Francisco Bay Area and using metrics that we have gathered from them to have a commuter score of 48 out of 100. 100 would be a perfect score. It's costing employees and the employer $9 million a year, 440,000 hours, and over 6 million pounds of CO2. What you can see is that there's a lot of clusters here of folks that potentially could commute to a new location. So what if this organization opened up these 3 satellite offices in San Francisco, Oakland, and in the South Bay? Well, this would see a dramatic increase, 50% in the commuter score, almost $4 million in savings annually, over 200,000 hours in savings, and almost 3 million pounds of CO2, just by bringing the office closer to where the employees live. So that's the context we're thinking about when we come into this. What we've done is brought in a group of really pretty great people here. As David said, I'm Andy, and I'm kind of talking more about the data and behavior side. And when we get to Q&A, I'm happy to answer any questions on that. We've also brought in folks from kind of 3 different areas that we think are most important. And I'm going to go right to left to just confuse everyone. So from the kind of logistics and transportation side, we've got Bobby Lauder-Young, who's the co-founder and executive director at Beeline Mobility. And Bobby leads a team of commute program architects specializing in the data-driven design, implementation, and management of modern mobility programs at Beeline. Previously, he worked at Ford Smart Mobility Company in Chariot, where he was the dedicated program manager operating shuttles for one of the big 5 tech companies. And today, he and his team are working to increase accessibility to modern mobility programs for corporations and communities alike by using forward-thinking technologies such as autonomous shuttles. And Bobby's been a member of ACT for almost 2 years, and we're really excited to have him here on this webinar. Next is Jen Arnsdorf from SpotX. She's the director of talent management there, and she's going to come in and bring this perspective on people, how they interact, on talent, how people operations, kind of that more HR talent side. Jen is an experienced people operations and talent development professional with a passion for learning and development. She has spent the last 8 years curating and enhancing the employee experience at her current organization by helping to create an inclusive and collaborative culture where employees can bring their whole selves to work. She is always looking to help employees discover their career aspirations and achieve their personal and professional goals. And then finally, and Michael is actually going to start us off here in a second. He's coming from the real estate side. He's the senior director of real estate advisory at WeWork, and he joined the company in 2017 after working at one of Australia's leading REITs. Since then, he has been responsible for the structuring and implementation of strategies to serve large corporate companies and their major transactions within WeWork. Mike has more than 10 years of real estate experience working in Australia, the United States, and Europe, focusing on leasing, acquisitions, and dispositions, and valuation across office, retail, industrial, and mixed-use asset classes. So we're really excited to have these 3 folks here. And with that, I'm going to pass it on over to Michael, who's going to get us started off here.
Thanks so much. Thanks for the introduction, Andy. And really excited to be here. I think this is on everyone's mind in the corporate real estate industry. So excited to discuss what we're seeing. I think I'm sharing my screen now.
Not yet. It's at the bottom there, that green share.
Not yet. Here we go. I'll give this a try.
See the black toolbar at the bottom? There's a green folder.
Does this work? Andy, I sent it to you yesterday. It might be best to get that up. I'm trying to do it. I'm getting some. Does this work? Can you see this?
Yeah, I can see your screen. Yep, go right ahead and then just hit the slideshow.
We're on. All right.
You're good. You're good.
I'm going to run through WeWork's views on what we're hearing from our biggest customers around the challenges that they're having today, both at the business level and at the employee level, how we're really solving some of those challenges in the near term, and then what we think the future is going to look like. And we're definitely believers that the future is going to look like a more distributed workforce, no doubt. So as Andy mentioned, my role is really trying to implement a lot of the flexible office strategies with some of the biggest companies in the world. So what are they saying? We'll start with just the challenges of the company themselves. They really are the same as they always have been. We're talking about revenue forecasts, fixed expenses as a proportion of the total company's expenses, what the variable expenses are doing, what their headcount projections are, and how the brand and products and services of the business may have changed given everything that's happened in 2020. And no doubt that there has been a lot of change. What are the external factors? What's the competition doing? What are the political implications on the business itself? What's happening socially, environmentally, and of course, now factoring in the uncertainty of things like pandemics. What we're trying to say is that there are increasing amounts of uncertainty for the corporate occupier. How are we responding, or how are they responding as it relates to their real estate decision making? They're looking at shorter term agreements. There is a greater focus on liabilities. They're looking to minimize downside risk. So taking on more flexible structures, a greater focus on the usage of space, and really trying to allow for the fact that uncertainty as it relates to timing is going to continuously change. So just to summarize, all of the challenges that a typical business would normally face, they are the same, except there is a greater amount of uncertainty. So it just forces every single decision to have a greater amount of risk aversion and focus on the ability to be able to course correct over time. And I'll come back to that in a second. What's been interesting this year is that there's been a really strong focus on the challenge of the individual employees. How has their environment changed given that everyone went from working in a large corporate headquarters to working remote? It's a big shift. It's never happened before. So there is a lot of learning. From every survey that you read on LinkedIn or every conversation that you have with a head of real estate or a head of people or CEO, we've summarized it into 3 real challenges for the employees. That is, can they be as productive as they once were when they're working remote? Can they innovate as quickly as they once could when they were working from an office? Can we retain them as well as we once could when we had them working in the office? So from a productivity standpoint, we think about, do they have desks? Do they have chairs? Do they have high-speed Wi-Fi, printers, scanners, a quiet place to work? When we think of innovation, we think of, do they have the ability to collaborate with their peers, seek inspiration from colleagues or other businesses that they're speaking to, or customers? And retention, do you have the same connection to your brand and the mission, the same level of learning and development that you are used to when you're working remote? We're seeing a shift at the moment to say that there is an in-between between a headquarters and working remote. There is a third option that hasn't really existed before. So our standpoint is that we're now making our offices all around the world available to a wide number of employees. You don't need a dedicated headquarters. You actually have the ability to access any number of the WeWork locations around the world to plug and play for the day. A safe, productive space to work, where we hope over time you'll have greater innovation, greater ability for businesses to retain their employees. So we're thinking about taking the office, or the idea of an office, a productive space to work, closer to where the employees live, or close to where their customers are, close to where their colleagues are. Provide optionality of places where to work. So it's not working from home or travel 40 minutes to the headquarters. They're ready to use the conferencing, office supplies, printers, and so on are all there, as well as the ability to understand how those spaces are being used. So just to summarize, we're looking at businesses, their employees, what are the challenges, and then we're trying to respond really quickly. Where we see the future going is we've got to work through a lot of these really, really, really tough questions. Is there an alternative to working from home or working from headquarters? I think everyone on this call is probably thinking that there is. That would be a distributed office. How much of the staff will be remote? What's the split between the headquarters, satellite offices, working from home? What does remote mean? Is there another definition? It probably relates to that first question. If we have a headquarters, satellite offices, or distributed office, spokes, whatever you want to call them, and working from home, how are each of those then designed? The headquarters still designed for heads down work, or are they something completely different? Is it a space that is purely driven, the design of that space purely focused on collaboration and innovation in a more intentional way? How does the recruitment strategy fit in, which I think others may be speaking about? You know, does the recruitment strategy change because you can be closer to specific great sources of talent? And I won't go through all the rest, but the point is there are some really, really tough questions. We think it's going to take an extended amount of time, probably some bad decisions, probably a little bit of money, working all of these out. But we see this as being a big structural change within our industry. And we jotted this down yesterday to try and articulate what it is that we're thinking. And we thought this is probably the best way of explaining it. What did 2019 look like? That probably looked like a business where the majority of employees worked at the headquarters, not that many in satellite offices. There's a third space that we were speaking of before, the idea of really, like, I guess, a spoke or even a more remote office, and working from home. Now, what was the shift in Q2 2020? It was the absolute opposite. It was no one going to headquarters, few people going to satellite offices or somewhere in between, and everyone working from home. Where do we see the future? We see the future having a smaller number of people in headquarters full-time, a smaller number of people than today working from home, and the majority of the population in what we're calling, very inspirational words that we're using here, the grey area. Where we work, we'll probably come up with some funky language for this in the future, but today, in a sales context, we're literally just thinking about how do we solve for the grey area? How can we let corporate companies spend all their time and energy focusing on what the design of the headquarters looks like? They can focus on what technology they need to implement for those employees that are working from home. And companies like WeWork can help solve that grey area, which is going to be probably facing the most amount of change in the next few years. Tomorrow's solution, talking about this, it's the same thing that I'm sure we're going to be speaking about for the rest of this webinar, but creating satellite offices. WeWork thinks we have the ability to solve large problems for customers because we have a global portfolio that can be used in a dynamic way, an elastic way. We're trying to get this away from the sales pitch, but typical real estate, you negotiate with a landlord. If you want to have 10 offices, it's 10 different landlords, 10 different leases, 10 different brokers, and so on. Pretty operationally intensive to manage, but importantly, if you want to course correct, it can become challenging. We think the future is going to be having a fluid grey area, so to speak, having locations in distributed offices that can be shut down, opened up, expanded, contracted with ease based on the usage. So I'm probably going to wrap up here. I think my time might be up, but I'll summarize everything in really one slide. There is going to be a need for dedicated space. There's no doubt about that. They're headquarters, they're places for people to be able to collaborate and innovate and feel like they've got a real connection to the business that they work for. We think that there's going to be this other third space. People aren't going to be going to Starbucks the same way that they once were, but they're going to want the ability to be able to access a quiet, productive space to work outside of their home. We think that there's going to be a greater need for utilization and reporting. How are both the dedicated spaces and the non-dedicated spaces, how do we know how they're being used? When are they at capacity? Are not enough people going to them? Have we taken on too much space? The utilization is going to become really important. And then what we think the secret sauce is having the ability to transfer, the ability to course correct is going to be vital, because the changes are going to be happening at such a dynamic pace over the next 3 years. It's going to be a learning process before you kind of find your feet, we think, in about probably 2024, 2025. So we think combining all of those elements is what the future of the real estate market really looks like, to be able to have a really kind of sustainable yet dynamic real estate portfolio or distributed workforce. That's everything from me. So thank you so much. Looking forward to hearing everyone else's thoughts. I believe I'm kicking it over to Jen.
Thank you. And I'll go ahead and get my screen shared as well. Okay.
Should see it at the bottom there, that green share folder.
Yeah, it's giving me some settings issues. Okay.
Yeah, don't hit the arrow, just hit the actual green folder.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
There you go.
All right. Perfect. Okay. So I actually wanted to spend a little bit of time talking through kind of the people perspective and how a distributed office model could kind of impact the workforce within an organization. And so I wanted to talk through some of the trends that we've seen in 2020, and then some of the potential benefits and the potential considerations organizations should think through when it comes to their workforce and what's going to be best for them. So I think, as we all know, 2020 has been a really unique year and presented a lot of learnings and a lot of opportunities, I think, for organizations to evolve how kind of they've always done things when it comes to how they operate in their workforce. What we've seen at our organization is, you know, in the early days of COVID, extremely low turnover, virtually no turnover. Employees were just essentially happy to have a job and maintain a job. And over the course of time, they had to obviously go from working day to day in an office to adapting to a fully remote posture. And so obviously, I think getting, you know, through those initial kinks of making sure everybody had the right equipment, making sure that everybody had the right platforms to continue to collaborate and to foster rapport and relationships across their team. What we've noticed the longer we've been in this posture is they're noticing a change in preference, and employees are starting to voice now that they appreciate the added flexibility that's come from being home all the time, being able to go out and walk the dog midday to recharge, being able to get that time back from their commute that maybe capitalized an hour or 2 hours of their day. This is having implications, at least in our organization, and I'm sure for others, around recruiting and retention. Initially going into COVID, we were on a hiring freeze, so virtually no talent was moving in or out of the organization. As you know, we've settled into COVID, and we're actually starting to see great trends with our revenue thanks to political spend. We're starting to hire again, and every single candidate is asking, what's your policy around flexibility, working from home? This is now becoming a factor that everybody's weighing into if they want to join your organization, and really wanting to understand what does it look like post-COVID, not just in the current situation. We're also seeing this with retention, and people are now exiting the organization to take on new opportunities and citing that the new company offers a fully remote option, or the option to just work a couple of days out of the week, again, allowing for more of that flexibility. So when looking at those trends, some of the potential benefits that a distributed office model could bring is it could have a really positive impact on the organization's culture. I know for us as an organization, diversity, equity, and inclusion have been a really huge focus in 2020. And by operating under a distributed model, that could open up a lot wider candidate pools, leading to a more diverse workforce and culture. Additionally, you know, cutting down people's commute times, giving them more flexibility could also really impact things like the number of women we see in leadership. So looking at our organization, for example, we see a pretty 50-50 split at the, I would say, mid-level management, so like director and senior director roles. As soon as you move to a more executive level within our organization, we see a dramatic drop off in the number of women in those roles. And so, you know, moving to a model that created more flexibility for employees, shortening commutes, that might be a way to impact that number of women in leadership. From a collaboration standpoint, I think there's a lot of opportunity for cross-functional collaboration and knowledge sharing. When working in a larger kind of HQ setting, teams are usually sitting amongst themselves, and most of the collaboration is happening in like either a forced meeting session or it's just the ad hoc kitchen talk. But in a smaller distributed office model where you might be working with people from product, from sales, from ops, there could be a lot of cross-functional collaboration and the ability to kind of foster different relationships based on being in close proximity to those people. And then finally, I think as Andy kind of touched on, the environmental impact, you know, so obviously organizations that are looking to reduce their environmental footprint and now have all these great measures of data to kind of showcase how cutting down on people's commuting times, cutting down on the amount of time people are spending in their cars could be really impactful to their sustainability and environmental efforts. Obviously, there's always, you know, two sides to every coin, and there's some things to consider. So, you know, kind of on the flip side of fostering more cross-functional collaboration, I think being in a distributed office model could limit or provide some challenges on how to foster, you know, kind of those whiteboard sessions or brainstorming sessions or larger team meetings that need to happen at certain cadences throughout the year. And again, that's just going to require some additional planning or an evolution of kind of how teams have approached that in the past. I think as well, there could potentially be some challenges in terms of onboarding. So looking at how organizations currently kind of assimilate new employees into the culture, and can you still do that when you're in a smaller office or a distributed office? So again, not something that can't be overcome, but I think something that will probably need to evolve or be looked at as you look to take on a more distributed workforce. Additionally, another element is for historically centralized functions like IT, HR, accounting comes to mind, even potentially recruiting. Like teams that have, you know, centralized files or centralized tangible assets that they store, you know, looking at how to evolve, how do we make sure people have all the right information and all the right equipment in the places that they need? Again, these are all things that I think just require a different thought and a little bit more thought and effort as we look to different models that people can take on. And then finally, and again, this isn't an extensive list, but just some things I think our organization is looking at as we look to evolve policy and process, but the rapport that can be built between an employee and manager. So, you know, having more limited face-to-face interaction between managers and their direct reports, you know, for greener, newer managers can be challenging at times. And obviously over the last 5 months, you know, at least in our organization, managers have been able to step up and still foster, you know, high team engagement and morale, and have found the ways to kind of do that in a remote setting. So it's not that it's not possible, but I do think in terms of spooling up managers and making sure that they're able to, you know, foster really productive relationships with their employees, there might be a need for additional training and resources to help them do that in a more distributed setting. So, you know, again, I think when looking at, you know, what's right for your organization, I think what we're learning from 2020 is that the needs and desires of employees are shifting, and it's going to be the organizations that can come up with creative solutions and kind of evolve their policies and current approaches to support those needs that are going to be the most successful at attracting and both retaining top talent. So again, just wanting to give kind of a little window into the people perspective. And with that, I'll pass it over to Bobby, who can kind of talk through more of the logistics.
Awesome, thanks, Jen. I am super pumped up to follow Jen and Michael's presentations. I love that we're all looking underneath different rocks and finding different things. So there's not a whole lot of redundancy here. So I think there's a lot of value from all panelists. Thanks to Commute-Based and ACT for inviting myself and for Beeline Mobility to be involved. We're really excited to be here. Let me go ahead and share my presentation. So while Jen and Michael and Andy were quite factual with their presentations, I think I'm going to try and pull at your heartstrings a little bit more. The opportunity that we have here is massive. We have a global opportunity to reimagine our daily commute and better understand how we actually want to be living and working on a day-to-day basis. And I think that that's something that we really shouldn't take lightly. And so I want to touch on what I think a couple of those opportunities are. But first, a quick intro to Beeline. Our mission is to reimagine the daily commute to help our clients increase their ROI, improve quality of life, and protect the environment that we all share more than anything else. That's really what drives us. What we typically do is use Commute-Based to be able to design, implement, and manage programs for how we get employees to the office. But what we're going to be talking about today is how we actually bring the office and to the employees. So prior to the pandemic, something to note is that America was seeing the largest economic expansion since the Industrial Revolution, which obviously came to a screeching halt as we're all at home today. I'm at home, I'm sure you're at home, and chances are you'll probably be at home tomorrow and the next day. So what's next? I think Michael really put this out there in a very constructive way, which is, previously centralized corporate real estate as a model was really the end all be all, with some organizations dabbling in flex work solutions such as telecommuting, or satellite offices, etc. But whereas that was more of a shoulder opportunity, it's really what's going to become the primary opportunity for our future in our workplace going forward. So just to kind of to really hone in on this, prior to the pandemic, again, corporate real estate, all-time high, massive transportation and commuting programs to get employees to and from that office. And obviously there were both facility and HR constraints. From the facility side, parking constraints was likely to be the primary challenge faced by most organizations. From human resources, recruiting and retention. Again, presently we're at home. So what does the new normal look like? Well, we really believe at Beeline Mobility that the strategically placed or distributed office model, to Andy's point, I think we're all still kind of trying to find a name for this model that is most apropos, but I think that it's definitely the future of the workplace. So when we zoom out, what I really want to know is, can we go from this to this? And the answer is 100% absolutely yes, we can. Because really this is most commonly associated with this, the big large corporate office structure, and the big expensive fancy commute programs that come with them. We believe that modes like this are most sustainable, most desirable modes can actually lead to this. Strategically planned co-working or not, it doesn't even necessarily have to be co-working, although that is an option. These strategically planned microsites can be planned out in the same way that, at least initially in the vetting process, in the same way that employee shuttles, van pool, carpool routes are vetted as well. Simple employee heat mapping process, which I'll go into here in a moment, at least to explore the viability. So something that our team has been speaking a lot with Commute-Based team about is this idea around the 15-minute commute. What if theoretically you could walk to work every day? What if you could go home, walk home, ride your bike home, your one wheel, which I want, by the way, home to see your kids for lunch? You know, imagine the money you would save, the carbon we would save for the environment, and what it would do for your general outlook on life. As a quick story, I want to just very briefly share that prior to living in Seattle and co-founding Beeline Mobility, I was living in Santa Clarita, northern Los Angeles, where I could afford to buy a home, and I was working in Santa Monica, where I could earn a salary to pay for that home. And even though it was only, you know, some 20, 30 miles as the crow flies, it would take me 2 hours to get to and from work. And I rededicated my life to solving this problem. I think that we've never had a better opportunity, and likely will never have a better opportunity, to reimagine how we live and work. And I think it's really important that we all evangelize the opportunity to be biking, walking, and taking more sustainable modes instead of even employee shuttles, where there will still be a place for modes like that. I know that there's a lot of folks on this that are likely eager to bring all of the topics, conversations, and points made by all panelists to their leadership to begin evaluating whether this is even possible for them. As Andy mentioned, Commutify does have a link that I'm sure he'll make available again at the end, so that you can kind of do a quick analysis for this. But you know, I'm happy to help as well. This brief employee heat mapping will allow you to very quickly identify where there is enough density to potentially support these offices. What's going to be really important is going through the suite of questions that Michael outlined in his presentation with the C-suite leadership team to make sure that everybody is aligned with what those this model needs to look like in order for it to work for your organization. So as far as getting started, the conversations that Beeline Mobility is having with different employers that are considering this model right now, and I'll say that we're just only helping employers to consider this model. We have yet to actually implement anything like this. Although we do believe that this is the way of the future, as mentioned. Baseline data, always crucial and paramount, and making sure that, again, the C-suite is on board with the direction of really vetting this model. And that's what a visioning workshop would be good for. Tailored mobility plans for every employee. This is a major shift. This is a major shift if this is something that your organization would actually considering doing. And that said, tailored mobility plans that actually outline an employee's different commuting options to and from the work site that is nearest to them is going to be really key in making sure that employees feel confident, safe, and comfortable about not just where they commute to with this new satellite office, but how they get there. And of course, as we all know, oftentimes people that live within an hour or two away from an office a minute or two away from the office are likely to be the ones that drive most often and are most difficult to get out of their cars. How do you get someone that's a mile away onto a bus or what have you? And so the education piece is a really powerful component. And also, to my colleague's point, making sure that you're measuring data, quantifying data, and understanding what story is being told by that data in order to make sure that your organization is remaining agile as you're consistently thrown changes that you're going to need to remain agile for. And then, so this is kind of our thought. Again, we have yet to launch something like this for a client, but this is kind of our thought that we've outlined for our clients that we are investigating this with, is that we kind of have outlined a 5-month investigation process that has us doing some visioning and budgeting to see if it even makes sense from that perspective, some analysis and planning, what does implementation planning look like, and really the employee engagement, and of course the ongoing measuring and optimizing of the program. So with that, I'm going to toss it back to Andy, but before I do, I just want to say that 2020 has been obviously an incredibly wild wild ride for all of us. And I just want to send everybody on this call and their families well wishes and good vibes. Andy, with that said, I'll pass it back to you, man.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Bobby and Jen and Michael, for everything that you said. For everyone on this call, whether you're coming from the TMA space or employer space, what we wanted to bring today was just kind of a diverse view at this approach. So from the real estate side, the people side, the logistics side, what does this solution look like? What are the challenges? What should you be considering? It's a big decision to jump into this, and we really do think that it's a great opportunity, as Bobby said, to make some big shifts. And as folks start coming back to the office, depending on where you are, maybe they already are now, maybe it's not for a few more months. Now's the time to think about this and really get to changing commuter behavior before it's too difficult to do that. So with that said, I popped up on the screen here this link. If you want, you can go to that site, learn a bit more about what we're doing at Commute-Fi with WeWork to advance this idea and sign up for a free analysis as well. And we can show you the numbers there. Does it make sense on the surface to use this distributed office model? So I've also put up our email addresses there. We're going to launch into Q&A here with Casey, but if you have any questions specifically for us and want to pass those along, I'm sure we're all more than happy to respond to those. But with that being said, thank you everyone so far for staying around, and excited to see what you have for questions. Casey?
Awesome. Thank you, Andy. And thank you to all of our other panelists. Great presentation this afternoon. Before I get started, just want to remind folks, there are quite a few questions here. Want to just remind you to please type in your question in the Q&A box, as well as please try to denote who the question is for. Try my hardest to decipher here, but if it's not, we'll throw it back to whoever can answer this question. I'm going to start here. I believe this one is for you, Jen. Jen, could you speak a little bit about the communications networks to connect distributed locations and how that is provided?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of communications, we see companies do it a lot of different ways. You know, our organization heavily leans on a tool called Slack to be able to interface. It allows you to chat, video, call. It's a great collaboration tool in which specific channels can be set up to foster that collaboration. So, I mean, I think there's a ton of platforms out there that give you that flexibility to, you know, be able to foster maybe some in-person interaction along with a remote component. And we've had a lot of success leaning on like a collaboration tool, which is essentially kind of what that is. So, I mean, I think probably some of the other guys can speak to what they use at their organizations. But I think those types of interactions, if that's answering the question, that allow for not only the sharing of information, but the quick connection of just pinging somebody if you need a quick answer, or being able to set up a more formalized meeting or group kind of conversation where we can channel all information to kind of a singular topic.
Hey, Casey, can I tag on to that?
Jump right in, Bobby.
I saw that Microsoft announced an update for Teams this morning in an article that I thought was actually kind of neat. I look forward to seeing how it works. It appears as if the feature has been designed to help people feel a sense of fulfillment, as if they're like doing a morning ritual, morning commute virtually prior to actually signing on and logging on to their computer, which is kind of neat. It'll be interesting to see if we see a new wave of solutions like that come to market as well.
Very cool. Anyone else before I move to the next question? Good. All right. Michael, this one for you. Are these employee challenges that you were discussing coming from clients in the US and or abroad?
Great question. It's everywhere. We have tried to summarize them as best as we possibly can. We speak to I think of the statistics, it's like 70% of the Fortune 500 we speak to, as well as a lot of fast-growing unicorn type companies. They're how we've generalized the challenges that they're facing. Their responses to those challenges, however, are very different, which is the interesting part. We had one of the top 5 largest tech companies in the world who spoke to us and said that their engineers were 400% more productive within the first 4 weeks once they were working from home, which we thought was incredibly interesting. That might dictate how they would respond in the future. We've now realized that that has come back a lot. There is a greater concern about those employees' well-being because a lot of that majority was just hours worked. So whatever hour they were saving in commute time was another hour that was at their desk. But to answer your question simply, it's from companies all across the world.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. This next one, I'm going to take it back to you, Jen. Jen, is there a consideration that employees live near one another, then they may be more likely to have similar socioeconomic status and result in more silos and actually reduce DEI from groups near low wealth communities or neighborhoods with low social diversity?
I think that's a great point. I mean, I think it's a great thing to take into consideration when looking at a model like this. But I think what we're learning as an organization on a DEI front is you have to be able to track and measure these things in order to impact them. So I think what this could do is illuminate where there's an opportunity to increase kind of the diversity of your workforce or understand what recruiting patterns or, candidate pool patterns you have in place. And so I think it all comes down to, which again is a little bit big, but like knowledge is power. So understanding kind of where there potentially is, silos or things that need to be either broken down or things that need to be looked into to understand how you can impact or drive numbers up is really, I think, how we're kind of approaching our DEI efforts. And I think that of a lot of other organizations. So hopefully that answers.
Okay.
Could I jump in there?
Yeah.
From the companies that we've spoken to, which the concern is definitely there. So it is a very, very, very important question. From what we've heard is that there is we think companies are going to have a greater focus on intentional collaboration. So let's say for 3 weeks out of every month, the idea is set that person up with the most productive work environment where they can work safely, they can get to work quickly, all of that kind of stuff, all that good stuff that might be better than they're working from home. But then having 1 week where there is really intentional collaboration. So making sure that you're bringing people from different backgrounds, different environments, and intentionally collaborating and communicating amongst each other to make sure that the best ideas, the best intentions, the breaking down of silos all comes together, but a much more focused approach. That's what we're hearing from the businesses that we're speaking to.
Excellent. Thank you for that addition. Okay, this next one, I think a few of you could answer it. I might steer it towards Jen or Michael. If anyone else wants to jump in, please do. For government or community-based organizations, and even for some corporate orgs, what does remote and distributed workforce mean for engagement with the community for whom it is our mission to serve? An example, can we have employees in distributed locations who have no geographic or physical connection to the community who have a good understanding of that community? It's a lot.
I can start off quickly with
Okay.
this. So I think, how this would work, especially for an organization that's really community-based, is thinking about distributed office less on, regional scale. So it's not necessarily opening up an office, let's say, in San Francisco and one in Los Angeles. Instead, it might be opening up an office in, North San Francisco and South San Francisco. So they still can be kind of nearby. And another point that Michael brought up too is thinking about this as an opportunity to actually get closer to folks or get closer to customers. Opening up an office that is nearer to that community. So maybe thinking a little bit less about the commute in this case, but let's say your headquarters are on the edge of town. Could you open up a smaller office centralized to that community that you're trying to work with, that maybe folks just go to once a week or a couple of days a week, and that actually could increase that, foster that that collaboration and that community building a bit more. So there's a lot of opportunities here where you actually select that place. But yeah, certainly you definitely want to consider what your job is and who you're supposed to be working with along those lines.
Anyone else? Okay.
I could add a couple quick points if that's
Okay.
cool.
Sure.
Something that hasn't been mentioned that's important to keep in mind is the economic impact for the small businesses that survive in ecosystems around, the major employers' centralized headquarters. And so it's one thing that we're talking about how the work sites might change and to a distributed offices model, et cetera. But it's really important to recognize that with the shift of corporate real estate will come a much larger shift of small businesses as well. And so I think what we'll see is over the next 5 to 10 years, as companies begin to establish satellite offices in suburban areas, that you're going to see a lot of businesses close down in urban areas and transition towards suburban satellite offices where they can continue to serve employees walking to grab lunch and things like that. So that's one thing worth noting. I'll just kind of wrap up there.
Thank you, Bobby. This next one is an interesting point, and I think most of you will be able to answer. The challenge I have with a distributed model is teams are not hired based on where individuals live. And for those that need to be in the office, a distributed model doesn't work. I'm concerned about inflated transportation costs because there are more regions to serve due to a difference in perceived benefits by employees based on what office they sit in. Does anyone want to respond to that?
I can give it a shot
Go for it.
if you like.
Go for it.
Teams are not hired based on where individuals live. And for those that need to be in the office, the distributed model doesn't work. I think that the way of thinking about it, unless I'm reading the point wrong, is that we think the future is going to be optionality. It's rather than have a single space where you're asking a wide variety of people to come to, it's having multiple places so that you're intentionally locating offices to remove the need for transport. When we think, everyone on this call, the way we think about a distributed model is providing offices to those distributed workforces as a solution to them having to work remote or have significant transportation times. So if they need to be in the office, I think the intention is to absolutely provide them the office, but something that caters more to their needs rather than the needs of the large corporate headquarters in a challenging to get to location. I think that's I presume that's what message was.
Yeah, Michael, I would just confirm exactly what you said. Optionality is really what is the future. And many companies may not get rid of their centralized headquarters. They may, there may be some further gray area, right? Where there's flex work available with these satellites where people can work remotely on site, et cetera. But to answer the attendee's question, one thing that you can consider doing is breaking out your heat map in a way that is divided by role, responsibility, or department to see where they are. To your point, companies with a higher headcount will likely have a more positive density to be able to join teams together and things like that. But yeah, it's a good question.
Okay. We have unfortunately hit the top of the hour here and don't want to take up everyone else's time. I know we didn't get through every question. If you do have any follow-up questions for our panelists today, please feel free to reach out to them, or you can follow up with me and I can give you their contact information. Really appreciate all of you staying on through the entire thing. Thank you very much. I want to thank our panelists today. Jen, Michael, Bobby, Andy for a wonderful job, and Andy and to the Commute-Based team for sponsoring. We thank you very, very much. Want to remind all of you that we do have another upcoming ACT webinar in 2 weeks on Thursday, October 15th. It's COVID's lasting impact on public transportation, lessons learned to build a more resilient future, sponsored by Transloc. Once again, I want to thank our panelists today for a wonderful presentation, and thank you all and look forward to seeing you on October 15th. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.